Thanks for joining us today, guys. We're going to be speaking today to Andrew Shirley, who I'll introduce in a minute, from Knight Frank. But first of all, I'll just tell you guys a little bit about Rare Finds, whoever doesn't know about the company. So Rare Finds, we're rare whiskey specialists. We specialize in rare whiskey casks, bottles as well, based out of Hong Kong, cover all of Asia and globally as well. And what we do here is we tend to capture every part of the industry. So we trade, we find the best deals, the best casks for our investors and our clients. While at the same time, we run a whiskey fund that people are able to invest into, kind of hands-off investment. They don't need to manage cask portfolios. And that's a fund that we buy some of the best casks we see into the fund to retrade at a later date. There's lots of experience in the companies from all our brokers, me, the founders. There's over 40 years of connections and experience. And beyond trading, we also help with brand building, consulting. We can work with brands to create labels, different bottlings. It's kind of like an all-round, one-stop for all company. I'm George Kutex. I'm a writer in the industry. I write for Forbes, SCMP, a few different magazines. I do auctions in Hong Kong, consult with different brands. I work in a lot of parts of the industry as well. And today, part of our Oak Gold Talks, it's our new series that we kind of meet industry experts, not specifically to whiskey, just all around the industry who are experts in a certain part of it, and get to hear their thoughts. So today we're talking to Andrew here. Thanks for joining us, Andrew, from Knight Frank. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the company. And funnily enough, well, not funnily, but Andrew is the editor of the Wealth Report. So I know for a fact that it's crazy. The Wealth Report is the statistics on whiskey from the Wealth Report are actually quoted everywhere. I think every time I see any kind of advertisement or anything in whiskey, it's always Knight Frank. They said that the whiskey grew over the last 10 years by 500%. So it's a very I guess a very well respected publication. And you are the editor of that. They look at all the different luxury investments over the last, well, I guess it's different years for different ones when you started, but I think you said it started in 2009 for whiskey. And of course, you analyze all the different luxury investments and assets that are around and see their growth and see how they're performing year on year, and I guess quarterly as well. Yeah. A little bit of an introduction. So today we're going to be talking, of course, about the Knight Frank Wealth Report. I'm going to pass it on to Andrew soon to tell us all about how they compile their data, how they find all this data, and they analyze it, and they tell us how whiskey's grown and the different assets as well. We're going to look at whiskey's performance more closely, and also something I'm quite interested as well, and I was really surprised when I saw some of the data, is how whiskey has performed through COVID-19. Obviously, just through the last year, the pandemic, the lockdowns, shutdown of duty-free, there's a lot happened for the whiskey industry to affect it negatively. So we can discuss a little bit about how it's been performing. So let's just jump in. Andrew, sorry, I've been talking for quite a while now. Yeah, so could you tell us a little bit just about the Wealth Report, kind of when it started, what you guys do? Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, George, and a big hello to everybody who's joined us today in Asia. Yeah, you're right, George. The Wealth Report is my baby. It's the big thought leadership report that Knight Frank puts out every year for our clients and their advisors, and the current one that I'm working on will be out in March next year, and it'll be our 15th, so quite a big anniversary for us. And the history of the report is, we put out an awful lot of research very specifically about property for our clients, because obviously Knight Frank is a property company. We're the world's largest independently owned property company. So we do an awful lot of property related stuff. But what we wanted to do for our clients was a bit of thought leadership that didn't specifically look at property or the things that we're trying, the services that we sell to our clients, but looked at the wider things that interest them and what their aspirations are. What are they investing in? What are the challenges and opportunities affecting, the ultra wealthy, in the wider world. So we look at things like wealth populations. We obviously look at geopolitics, all of those sorts of things that might influence the lifestyles and investment decisions of our clients. So it's it's very broad ranging. What we discovered about 6 or 7 years ago was a lot of our clients, they own these amazing properties, these amazing houses, but they were also becoming much more interested in what we call these luxury investments. So people have always had art on their walls, that kind of thing. But now people are actually looking much more at the investment value of these things and collecting things specifically, not just to own them as well, but in the hope that somehow they'll go up in value. Although it should be clear that we do survey our readers, and actually the joy of ownership is still the overriding reason why people buy these things. It's to have a lovely picture on your wall, it's to be driving a lovely classic car, or to drink some fine wine or whiskey. But actually, the investment value comes a close second. And actually, it's interesting when this varies around the world, but when you look at Asia, actually, high net worth Asians are actually much more interested in the investment value of the things that they buy than perhaps traditional collectors in the US or Europe. So what we decided to do off the back of this interest was to introduce this luxury investment index, which started off tracking about 8 or so different asset classes, but we've expanded it over the years. We added rare whiskey the year before last. Last year we actually added Hermes handbags because there's a growing market for collecting these very rare handbags. It's really interesting, actually. The biggest collectors of handbags in the world tend to be divorced women. So I don't know if it's a kind of revenge collection. They're spending their divorce settlements from their husbands on their handbags. But there's some amazingly wealthy collectors in Singapore and around the world spending up to $200,000 on a handbag. But
I'd be interested to see. So I'd be interested to see if like divorced husbands are like the biggest collectors of the whiskey. After the divorce, the wives go to the bags and the men can get as many bottles as they want without. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, drowning their sorrows, maybe, but to sort of focus specifically on whiskey, we have what we call our private office at Knight Frank, which focuses on our very wealthy clients, and we have teams of what we would call ambassadors who go out to the countries where we operate in Asia, like China and Hong Kong. And what they were starting to tell me was, look, Andrew, these guys we work with, they've had these very big sellers of expensive fine wines, but now what we're starting to see is actually they're not losing interest in wine, they still love it, but they're looking for a new challenge, something else to collect. And what they're starting to do is create their cellars of fine whiskies, and they're spending tens, even hundreds of thousands of pounds on rare whiskies. So that's when we decided to include rare whiskey in our luxury investment index. And that graph that you've just put up there, George, clearly shows the performance of whiskey over the 10 or so years that we've been tracking it using data from Rare Whiskey 101. So once we put it into our index, it jumps straight to the top as the top performing asset class over 10 years. It's gone up in value by well over 500%, based on the basket of whiskey that we track. And you asked me to say, how do we compile this data? What Rare Whiskey 101 have done for us is they track all the auctions of rare Scotch whiskey, and they've created a basket of about 50 rare whiskies that they thought would be of interest to the sort of typical high net worth collector, the typical Knight Frank client. So this graph that you've put up there tracks the value of those 50 rare whiskies that they put into that basket.
I see. And something I wanted to ask. So looking at this one too, like it's quite a nice graph with like the growth and over a 10-year period, a 12-month period. So what aside from Rare Whiskey 101, so you look at auctions, do you look at other like segments of the market, like the secondary market? Like I guess it's hard to monitor more than auctions, but what other, do you speak to retailers, for example? How is the data compiled?
Well, the index is specifically based on auctions because it's totally transparent, and obviously we want our data to be transparent. But to get the background for the market, I am talking to distilleries and people who specialize in the market for casks and that kind of thing. But the actual data in our index is based on purely auction results, because it's public information and completely transparent.
Yeah, I think that's the difficulty. Like us working in cask trading, I mean, obviously we see some in auctions, but I think most of the cask trading is done through like privately. So I mean, I guess if you added on that, you'd probably see more growth. But that's always like a hard part of the market to monitor, because casks, you can't really see them online as opposed to auctions that are, immediately available.
Yeah, I mean, and the good thing about the auction market is that you see repeat sales of the same bottle of whiskey, so you can keep track of it. I guess every cask is going to be pretty individual, so to create a cask index might be slightly tricky. But as with all of these indexes, you have to make the point that we are recording the value of a specific sector of the market. Not every rare whiskey will have gone up 500, almost 600% over the last 10 years. Some might have gone up more, but what we hope that our index does is provide an overall guide to the health of a market. So obviously if you're making investment decisions, you need to do a lot more due diligence and just rely on our index. If you look at classic cars, for example, not every classic car has gone up almost 260% over the past 10 years. It's important to talk to experts. We're just sort of trying to pull out the big themes and the big trends across the world of luxury investments.
Have you seen any any overlap? I mean, I'm just mostly with your readers, because I'm sure the rest don't entertain. But have you seen that, say, people that are very interested in, like from here, say watches or cars, tend to dip into other collectibles, or do you see that mostly people target a certain one? Like there's only this person's whiskey, this person's this person's that, or do you kind of see an overlap? I've always been curious about that. If collectors of wine go into whiskey, and collectors of watches go into other collectibles.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, you can look at these asset classes in a different way. I think art would probably stand on its own, because that's one of the oldest sort of collectible asset classes, and people who collect art would very much view themselves as art collectors probably. But things like watches and whiskey and wine, they probably fall into this lifestyle kind of basket. So if you're interested in rare whiskey, there's a good chance that you would like watches and wine. And I think once people sort of get the collecting bug, they would probably apply that to different areas of their life. So they probably wouldn't just have one watch, they'd buy a couple of them. Whether they're buying their watches specifically for investment, probably not always the case, but they would view themselves as collectors, in the sense that they're buying rare watches that interest them. So that, and they're also that it's a stereotype, but they're also quite blokish type things, whiskey, watches, that kind of thing. Although there's a growing number of women who appreciate fine whiskey. I would say that it's probably still a male driven kind of asset classes, but that's certainly changing a little bit.
It's really interesting actually that you said that a lot of, like, in the West it's more like drinking and such, and here they're more investment focused. I mean, I've definitely noticed that from working in the UK and then moving over here and working, that here it is much more driven by investment. I mean, they still drink whiskey, but there's some bottles that will never be opened, that they're usually bought here in Asia in these big auctions. Which is quite interesting. But yeah, so moving on. So I remember when I first contacted you, I asked about like how COVID's kind of affected whiskey, and you sent me like a nice link to your article I can share with whoever's watching after, because there's not been a report this quarter, but it's an overview of all the luxury investments. And so you said that from the research, the wine and whiskey have stayed quite steady.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly the case. I think one of the reasons is that a lot of these investments like art and whatever, they're sold, classic cars, they're sold at live auctions. And when you're spending a lot of money on art or a classic car, those are auctions you kind of tend to want to attend in person. So it's been very difficult for those markets during the pandemic. But for wine and whiskey, I think those auctions have they've had much more of a sense of being online auctions. People are used to bidding for a bottle of whiskey online, so those auctions have still been able to continue, a little bit less affected than perhaps the art and the classic car auctions. So I think the medium for sales has still been able to continue, because it's a bottle of whiskey, you can view it online. You're not going to be able to taste it before you buy it, so you buy it online. You get the bottle of whiskey is posted dispatched to you. So
Wow.
that sort of element has carried on. And also, apart from the very expensive whiskies and wines, we're looking at a slightly lower price point than really expensive wine or really expensive classic cars. So people who have perhaps been looking a little bit more at their outgoings, cutting back perhaps because of COVID, I mean, they've still been able to carry on collecting whiskey and wine because, £10,000 for a bottle of nice whiskey is perhaps less of a commitment than £5 million for a painting or a rare classic car. So I think that sort of added to the resilience of wine and
That's
whiskey. And
interesting.
we also see that people like to drink them, and when times are a little bit tricky, people like to have some nice bottles of wine and nice bottles of whiskey sometimes, just to help life seem that little bit better.
Yeah, that is quite interesting because I think, because I don't know if you've seen, but there's like a lot of new online whiskey auctioneers popping up. So, I mean, that's probably what you're saying, like a lot of them, because I see a lot of them doing well and people are at home and they can't attend these auctions, obviously, to buy a multi-million-dollar painting that you want to see. But that does make sense that the online auction world has probably helped push and keep whiskey in it. I don't know. I've spoken to some people. I don't know if you've seen this too, but I've seen like the price point in some bottles of whiskey, like less so. I think casks have been performing quite well simply because of the lack of not simply because of that, but the lack of logistics and shipping. As you probably know, it's all paperwork. So it's made much easier as opposed to shipping, and you have to go somewhere. Everybody's in lockdown. But I have also seen that in terms of bottles, like a lot of the not low price, but like mid-range bottles have been doing very well, whereas the really, really ultra premium part of the market has slowed down a little bit. I've seen that from some of my broker friends and people that have retailers, that people are because maybe they're doing what you said, they're buying a bottle at a price that they would be okay with opening the bottle if whatever happened, it's not one that you could never open.
Yeah, I think part of it is during a pandemic, we see a lot of the world suffering. There's a question of taste, whether it's good taste to spend £1 million on a bottle of rare whiskey at such a troubling time for the whole world. So anecdotally, I'm hearing the same as you, that sort of perhaps people are pulling back from some of those really punchy top end prices because they want to be seen as perhaps having a more considered view of the world around them at such a difficult time.
True. So here, like we showed like a similar graph before, but this is the most recent one. So this 12 month obviously is for the last year, and whiskey's still showing is that an 8% growth, like the rare whiskey? Is that
so these go up to the end of September. So that's the growth of the index that Rare Whiskey 101 has created for us. So yeah, in the 12 months up to the end of September, we've still seen growth of 8%, which is a little bit slower than the annual growth that we've been seeing over previous years. But I mean, it's certainly nothing to cry about in terms of an asset class. 8% growth is pretty good over 12 months.
Yeah, true. And here we have there's another one here that I quite liked. That just shows I guess stable, like a lot of stability there as opposed to crazy growth, but it's stayed quite stable.
Yeah, I mean, the asset class that we tracked that was sort of performing in a similar way to whiskey was classic cars. They had this really, really strong growth, but markets can't keep going up exponentially all the time. So, you do get to a point where they have to level off and perhaps a little bit of the froth comes up off the market, and it's a time to take stock. One of the, you'll know better than me, but there's not a huge volume of whiskey that's sold each year compared with, say, the fine wine market. So it's there's relatively limited numbers of bottles that get sold. So in terms of supply and demand, the fundamentals are there, I would say, to imagine to keep that sort of steady growth.
Yeah. One question I had for you, I don't know I know the Welsh report is quite it's just you just analyze the data, obviously, but I speaking to some people in the industry, I reckon if whiskey and such have held steady over this year, do you believe, based on the past, that when things open up and there's a lot of I guess people are happy again, people are allowed to go about, everything opens up, do you reckon it'll continue steady, it'll grow more? Like, I know it's just a personal question, like opinion. It's not based on any data, but I am quite curious about that based on past, like, I don't know if you've like written about any of these, but past similar global like issues, I guess, has that kind of, when that's gone, like bubbles have gone, has it grown afterwards, or you think it would just stay steady? You don't have to answer
well,
that.
the one thing we're not allowed to do as an estate agent is offer investment advice on
Okay.
anything. So I can't, I can't
Yeah, that's fine. That's
really.
fine.
But but just talking to Rare Whisky 101, I think their sentiment is that things are picking up a little bit in the final quarter, because you can just see from that graph there was a bit of a dip right at the end, but I think they are predicting that there might be a little bit more growth to come by the end of the year.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was just curious about that because I just personally I've seen, like, if it's continued through this, I reckon, like, when airports open, travel open, bars as well, it might. But then again, people might be out more and less stuck to their computer on online auctions. So you don't really know how it's going to go.
Certainly the interest is still there in terms of rare whiskey. The Macallan's just, we were talking about it earlier, they just launched that red range. Just got an email in my inbox, not Scottish whiskey, but I think the most expensive bottle of new Irish whiskey has just been released from one of the distilleries in Ireland. So, there's still lots of momentum in the whiskey sector, and particularly in terms of the Asian market, it's still a very new area. So, the interest is still there. There'll be the enthusiasm for collectors who are getting younger and more diverse. We talked about, more ladies getting interested in whiskey. So I think the momentum is there to support the market in terms of new releases and new collectors.
Yeah. Oh yeah, now that you mentioned that, for everybody watching, it is worth mentioning that the research that Knight Frank and the Wealth Report do on whiskey is on Scotch whiskey. So it's not, it doesn't include Japanese whiskey, obviously world whiskey, Irish whiskey. It's all in Scotch. So that's something to bear in mind. But yeah, I think that's us for today. Thank you very much, Andrew, for letting us know. I've always actually been quite curious about the Knight Frank, the Wealth Report. So I'm kind of personally glad I had you on to see exactly how it's compiled. That's some of the details here. And now, if anybody has any questions before Andrew goes, don't ask him any investment questions like I just did, because you're not going to get it. But if you have any questions about the report, or any of the collectibles, you can ask us a few questions now. Wait a few minutes, or we'll bring this to a close. But yeah. Are you a fan personally of whiskey, Andrew? Are you a fan, or just
Well, I was lucky enough that when we launched whiskey in our luxury investment index, I got to go up to Scotland, and I visited Macallan distillery and also the William Grant distillery, and I, in the company of a chap called Charlie McLean, who's considered one of the godfathers of Scotch whiskey. So he's a real expert. So actually, the chief distillers wheeled out some really, really nice old whiskies for us to sample. So some of them are really dark whiskies that kind of almost treacly, which I really like. So I'm not an expert or a connoisseur, but there's some that I do enjoy.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, that's the good thing about it as an investment, like, compared to other alternative assets, is that you can. I think people who really get into whiskey, they really love it because you can do like a bit of investment, a bit of, like, if you really enjoy a liquid, like tasting, drinking, it's kind of a multifaceted investment, which is why one of the reasons I think it's became so popular.
And there's also the romance behind it. These old distilleries, these ghost distilleries that no longer exist, but casks are still coming out from them. I mean, Diageo, I think, are going to reopen their Brora ghost distillery, which demands some of the highest prices for casks and whatever. So there's this huge interest. Oh, we've got a question.
Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think we are seeing huge interest in other parts of the world. I mean, we only include Scotch whiskey in the index because from logistically, there's, auction results account. They are mainly driven by Scotch, so that's why we include them. But you see some amazing prices being paid for Japanese whiskies, also Korean whiskies, and as I mentioned, I think Ireland is claiming that they invented whiskey, and now they're trying to play catch up and kickstart their industry. There's a lot more Irish distilleries. I think there's an amazing shop in London that's pretty much got a rare whiskey from every country in the world. I think there's distilleries everywhere now, in Scandinavia, in India, and all sorts of places. So it's a real global trend. It's not just limited to Scotland.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of countries, like India's in it now. Here in Taiwan, they're in it. I think but I just don't think. I think for investment, I reckon it'll still be Japanese, Scotch, Irish is getting up there. There's a big bourbon market in the US too. Like there's a huge bourbon collecting market.
Yeah.
Wait, there was another question for you. Wait, that's in the Q&A. Maybe you can't see it. That's in the Q&A. Would you advise that's from David. Would you advise investing in new make spirit from 2020 based on the reduced production levels this year? Yes, I don't know, David, if Andrew.
Well, I was asked this question by a journalist the other day, and I think my response was, if you've got somebody that you want to buy a cask of new make for a christening present that they can open, in 18 years' time when they come of age, I think that would be a really fun thing to do. But there's a lot of new distilleries opening in Scotland at the moment, and obviously they've got to cover their costs, so they'll be selling these new make spirit casks and whatever. So I think you have to be careful about what you are investing, because one of the things I've seen is that things go in peaks and troughs for luxury investments. Things are trendy, fashionable one year, there's a lot of enthusiasm for them, and so while we're seeing a huge interest in Scotch whisky now, can I hand on heart say that in 18 years' time there will still be such demand for it? Who knows? You've got to kind of take that punt, and obviously they always say past performance is not a guide to future performance. So if you're going to enjoy drinking your new make cask in some point in the future, go for it. But I don't think you can put your house on it that it is going to be worth more in the future, because there's a lot of competition in that market, I think.
Yeah. See, I'm sure you get a lot of these investment questions. It seems like you've had a lot of practice. So I'm sure everybody's as soon as you hear Knight Frank, they're always like, what's the next thing? Tell me what to invest in. So I'm sure you get a lot of questions like that. Anybody else?
Obviously, if you are investing, the key thing is to do due diligence about who you're investing with. There was a lot of wine funds that set up, and not all of them were completely honest, or even buying the wine that they were saying they were buying. So make sure that you trust whoever it is who's helping you with your investments.
No, yeah, that's a thing in the whiskey industry as well. You need to properly trust who you're going with and the brands. Anyone else have any questions? It's on the half an hour mark, so if nobody else has anything else to ask Andrew, we'll bring this to a close. Give him a few. Yeah, should be okay. Anything else? If anybody wants to ask a question that comes up after, just send us an email and or a message, and we'll try and get Andrew to answer it for you. But yeah, that's it for today. Andrew, thank you very much. This has been awesome. Yes, usually when I do whiskey webinars, I kind of know what we're talking about, but this, as I said, is one I've been really interested in as well. Thanks for taking the time to join us and run us through the report.
And if anyone comes back to you with inquiries about our index or the wealth report, just send them our way, and we'll put them on the mailing list to get a copy of it when it comes out next March. Is when the next wealth report will come out. Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, for sure. Anybody, wants just forward the emails, and we'll get you through. I'm excited to read that. I might send you my email to put me on the mailing list as well. Okay, great. Okay, Andrew, thank you very much again. Have a good day in the UK, and hopefully talk to you soon. Okay. Thanks so much, George. Bye bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye bye.